She had the boarding pass, the credentials, the seat assignment. But on Flight AV316 from Denver to Boston, none of that mattered when a flight attendant looked at her, a poised black woman sitting quietly in 2A, and decided, without cause, she doesn't belong here. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know she'd built the very ethical system monitoring airline bias. Didn't know the call she made from that cabin wouldn't be loud. It would be systemic. What if the woman you tried to dismiss was the one who designed the infrastructure to hold the aviation industry accountable? And more than that, what happens when a powerful black woman refuses to perform outrage and lets the system speak for her? This isn't just a story about being denied a seat. It's about legacy, quiet justice, and the day silence echoed across 152 grounded planes and $2.1 billion in halted operations. If you've ever been questioned for simply existing where you had every right to be, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe, because you're about to witness what happens when the quietest one on the plane rewrites the entire flight path. It started with a smile, not a kind one, the kind that stretches just enough to signal control, superiority. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said smoothly, tilting his head as if adjusting his moral compass. "I think you've wandered into the wrong line." Dr. Amara Ellison didn't speak. She simply held out her boarding pass first class, seat 2A, Flight AV316 to Boston. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't explain herself. She had learned, long ago, that explanations were wasted on people who had already decided you didn't belong. The gate area bustled. Phones chimed. A toddler giggled somewhere behind the business class partition. Two men in identical Navy suits debated market numbers near the corner window. But right here, in front of the gate, the air changed. The attendant, Brian Cole. According to the golden nameplate that gleamed with a polish he hadn't extended to his tone, studied the boarding pass like it was counterfeit currency. "Huh," he muttered. "Looks fancy." Then, without warning, he tore it clean down the center. One piece fluttered to the floor like a feather. The other, he dropped into the trash can by the jetway. "Next time," he said lightly, "you might want to dress the part." A few heads turned. No one spoke. Not the tall man scrolling through emails on his Apple Watch. Not the woman adjusting her Chanel scarf while pretending not to look. Not even the couple in matching Patagonia fleeces, both watching. Both frozen. Amara stood still. Her navy blue blouse was neatly tucked into tailored trousers. Her bag, soft leather. No visible brand, rested gently against her side. Her face, serene, not confused, not shocked, just aware, the kind of awareness born from repetition. Brian shifted uncomfortably. A silence was building. Then came the voice captain level, older, curt. What seems to be the issue, Captain Walter Haynes, tall and aging with distinction, stepped forward from the jet bridge. He didn't need to ask. He'd seen the whole thing. Brian gave him the look, that look, the one that says, "I handled it." She was attempting to board first. No digital priority, no elite status. Haynes gave Amara a once-over. His eyes paused at the lack of makeup, the soft curls not perfectly pressed, the wrist without a diamond watch. He didn't see fear in her eyes. That was the problem. "Ma'am," he said more firmly now, "if you can't produce an updated boarding confirmation or verified clearance, I'll have to ask you to step aside. We have actual priority customers to board." Actual. The word hung in the air like exhaust. Behind her, the line of passengers shifted. Not a word spoken, but you could feel it, the tension, the judgment, the silent, why is she here? Amara blinked once, then twice. She didn't raise her voice. She lifted her wrist instead. Her smartwatch glowed faintly. A subtle interface appeared, the soft blue on black. GridTone log activated. Flight AV316. Timestamp 2:41 p.m. Observation discriminatory language. Unauthorized boarding denial. She tapped once, then again. Nothing loud. Nothing visible to anyone but the camera perched in the upper right corner of the jetway ceiling. Brian crossed his arms. We've asked politely. Ma'am, we will call security. Amara turned slightly, not to retreat but to open her carry-on. She retrieved a duplicate boarding pass, sleek, minimalist, marked with a federal clearance code that most airline staff had never seen. She held it up, not toward them, but again to the camera. Let the system decide, she said quietly. Captain Haynes chuckled. You think we're running on democracy now? He turned toward the gate desk, muttering, We've got a disruptive passenger at gate 9A, requesting assistance. And then came the whisper from behind her, a teenage boy with a phone, half whispering to his sister. That's her, the woman from the Forbes AI list. She heard it. Brian didn't. He kept speaking. You're not flying today. Let it go. She tapped again. GridTone ethics override protocol on standby. Activate lockdown. Yes, no. She hesitated, just for a moment, then, gently, without blinking, she tapped yes. There was no alarm, no light, no gasp, only a soft, inaudible chime in her wrist, and far away in a building most people had never seen, 3 levels below a compliance center in Arlington. Virginia, an alert popped up on the screen of a junior analyst. Code Ellison AMX1. GridTone, priority, ethics trigger. The analyst paused, looked up, whispered, She's on a flight. At gate 9A, Captain Haynes turned back to Brian. Board the next one. Don't hold up the line. Brian nodded. She'll be dealt with. But as he reached for the intercom again, his screen blinked red. Delay code GTLK1. Ethics lock. Clearance pending. System glitch. He asked. Amara didn't respond. She'd already stepped back, not toward the exit, but toward her seat. As she passed Brian, she said one thing, one line, soft, even, precise. You just tore federal property. His jaw tightened. You think this is Washington? Amara kept walking. Row 2A was empty, waiting. She sat, crossed her legs, opened her tablet, and began to write. Not a complaint, not a message, just notes. Notes for the system. Because if they wouldn't learn from listening, they'd learn from being seen. There's a moment just after humiliation, but right before rage where time stops. Not literally. Planes still board, gate agents still type, babies still cry 3 rows back. But inside the mind of the person who's just been dismissed, the world goes still. That's where Amara Ellison sat. Not in seat 2A. Not just yet, but in that still place inside herself. The place she'd been trained by necessity to recognize. The place where disappointment goes to be managed. Where injustice is folded and filed under expected. She remembered it. From college, when her professor had marked her thesis too advanced to be original. From the venture pitch, when her own patent was called ambitious for a team your size. From the hotel conference, when she was asked if she was with catering. And now, here, a torn boarding pass, a gate agent whose smile curled like a leash, and a pilot who didn't ask for her name, just her absence. The line behind her had resumed, people stepping forward, pretending not to notice the tension they'd just witnessed. Polished shoes glided across the carpet. The next man in line, a managing partner, judging by his laptop stickers, avoided eye contact with Amara entirely. She watched his feet, shiny black soles, expensive, one step forward, then another, and just like that, he crossed the invisible line on the carpet, the one that divided real passengers from the ones who were asked to prove it. Amara finally moved. She adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped forward. Each movement was measured, her breath slow, her expression unchanged. Her hands trembled only once, just briefly, when she sat down. But she rested them on her lap, fingers folded, hiding it from the cabin crew and from the phone cameras already beginning to flicker in the back. Across from her, Brian Cole stood behind the small galley curtain, tapping furiously on his tablet. She could see his face reflected in the overhead bin, tight, frustrated. He was typing something into the airline's internal crew log. She didn't need to see it to know what it would say. Passenger flagged for disruptive behavior. There would be no mention of the torn pass, no record of the condescension in his voice, just a few keystrokes and another label to carry. Amara's tablet buzzed once. GridTone event, log active, Flight AV316, ethics alert level 1. She tapped open the console. No one around her could see the interface. It looked like a notepad. A blank, elegant design, more design studio than enforcement hub. She entered a single phrase, initial interaction dismissal without verification. Possible bias protocol breach. From the row behind her, someone cleared their throat. She didn't turn. She'd learned, by now, that the real judgments never came face to face. They arrived sideways, disguised as commentary, as tone, as questions meant to remind you how out of place you were. She looked forward instead, through the narrow aisle, past the first-class divider curtain, toward the cockpit, where Captain Haynes had disappeared once again. What she didn't see, but knew, was this. In a quiet compliance office in Virginia, a second monitor had activated, not loud, not flashing red, just a shift in tone, a change in posture. Rhea Desai, junior compliance analyst at the National Aviation Compliance Authority, leaned forward in her chair. Amara Ellison, she whispered. The system had tagged her GridTone credentials as active. Rhea's supervisor wasn't in the room. She tapped her screen. Access level architect override. Origin passenger ID AVE3267. Rhea blinked. She'd studied GridTone at MIT, wrote her graduate paper on the integration of machine learning and ethics tracking. She never imagined she'd see an architect-level lock triggered mid-flight. Back on the plane, Amara remained still. The passenger in 3C turned to the woman beside him. "She's just doing this for attention," he muttered. Amara didn't react, but her wrist did. Audio tag, hostile assumption. Source passenger 3C, recorded. GridTone logged it, not for vengeance, for accountability. She made another note. Pattern of mischaracterization emerging. Flight crew has not attempted correction. A few seats behind her, a teenage girl, perhaps 16, leaned toward her mother. "Mom," she whispered, "that's the woman from the GridTone article you showed me, from the ethics hearings." Her mother didn't speak, but she looked at Amara, really looked, and in that silence, Amara felt something flicker, not admiration, not sympathy, just recognition. It was enough. because recognition is the seed of change, and once planted, it refuses to go back underground. Brian stepped into the aisle again. His voice was tighter this time. The passengers were restless. The delay was unexplained. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're experiencing a slight systems update. Please remain seated. We appreciate your patience." He avoided looking at her. Captain Haynes reappeared next. His voice clipped, eyes scanning every seat except one, the one that mattered. Amara watched him. He didn't meet her gaze. Power never likes to be reminded it miscalculated, especially not by someone who doesn't raise their voice. Her tablet buzzed again. Ethics alert lock confirmed. FAA notification pending. Delay duration 4M38s. Escalation level 2. She tapped one more field. Incident classification, disproportionate flagging, disregard of Protocol 4B verification before removal. In the back, someone opened a laptop. Another tried to connect to in-flight Wi-Fi. Nothing loaded. The hum of quiet panic began faint, like pressure behind a wall. Amara sat motionless. The plane hadn't moved, but the world already had. The overhead lights flickered once. Just a momentary glitch, one the average passenger might blame on pre-flight jitters or faulty wiring. But Amara noticed it. GridTone was sinking. She felt the hum beneath her seat. It wasn't mechanical. It was systemic. The entire aircraft's digital backbone was now in dialogue with a protocol most of the crew didn't even know existed. She looked forward. Elena Ruiz, the co-pilot, emerged from the cockpit. Her movements were brisk, efficient, but there was an alertness to her now. A woman used to keeping timelines, suddenly conscious that the minutes were no longer hers. She leaned over to whisper something to Captain Haynes, who barely turned his head. He gestured toward Amara's row. Elena followed his line of sight, and her expression shifted the moment she saw who was sitting in 2A. She didn't look away quickly. She studied Amara, as if trying to match a face to a headline she'd forgotten she'd read. Amara didn't flinch. She sat with her ankles crossed, tablet in her lap, the soft glow of her smartwatch pulsing in a rhythm she knew by heart. Elena stepped forward slowly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm First Officer Ruiz," she said quietly. "I understand there may have been a misunderstanding during boarding." Amara didn't look up. Not yet. Her fingers moved gently across the tablet, logging data. Elena waited, respectfully, uncomfortably. Then Amara met her eyes. There wasn't a misunderstanding. She replied. There was a misjudgment. Elena nodded slowly, as though those words had the weight of a cockpit warning. "I see," she said. "Do you mind if I verify your boarding clearance, before she could finish?" Amara turned the tablet toward her, not dramatically, not with anger, just enough for Elena to read the authorization code. Passenger, Docker, Amara Ellison. GridTone Classification Architect Level Clearance, NACA AV316 EL OVAR. Elena's breath caught. Your Amara nodded once, and Elena, bright, young, ambitious, realized she'd been flying with a woman who had helped build the very ethical overlay her airline claimed to follow. Behind her, Captain Haynes stiffened. He stepped forward, his voice low but filled with a new urgency. "I was unaware of her. Status." Elena didn't speak. She was still absorbing it. This wasn't just a passenger with a boarding pass. This was the quiet hand behind the algorithm. The woman whose testimony before the National Aviation Ethics Commission had gone viral. The voice that never shouted, yet had forced an industry to listen. "I'm going to check with operations." Elena said, but Amara had already turned her eyes back to her screen. Do what you need to, she replied. Elena left. Captain Haynes lingered for a beat longer, watching Amara in silence. Then he turned and disappeared through the cockpit door. Amara sighed quietly. The moment passed, but her pulse didn't slow. She was tired, not from confrontation, but from the exhausting ritual of having to remind the world over and over that she belonged in rooms it claimed to have built for everyone. The teenager in row 4 reached for her phone again. This time, her mother didn't stop her. They were no longer hiding their curiosity. They were watching closely, not in judgment something else, something more layered, reverence, maybe, or fear that their silence had made them complicit. Behind her, in business class, Isaac Lynn sat up straighter. He had been watching the delay unfold with the careful eye of someone who understood systems. A journalist by trade, tech by training, Isaac knew what a standard delay looked like. This wasn't one. His screen showed 11 other flights across the same region now flagged as ethics under review. He blinked. That was impossible. Or, rather, it had been before GridTone was approved. He typed quietly, unconfirmed source, multiple commercial delays due to real-time AI compliance alert, centered around AV316. Story developing. He hesitated before posting, then glanced again at Amara Ellison. That name. He remembered now. 3 years ago. She'd refused to sell her ethics monitoring software to a major airline because they wanted the power to mute alerts mid-flight. Instead, she'd gone to Eneka, the compliance watchdog with teeth. She'd coded a failsafe that no corporation could override. And now, here she was on a flight that had triggered the very protocol they tried to ignore. He posted the tweet. The first domino fell. Meanwhile, Amara logged another note, crew recognition partial, delay and accountability acknowledgement, bias normalization observed, recommendations protocol reinforcement training. She paused. Her fingers hovered. She felt the anger trying to rise, the part of her that wanted to scream, to stand, to make them see all at once. But rage wouldn't serve here, not today, so she breathed instead, a calm breath in, a steady breath out, and with it, the heat dissolved, not forgotten, just set aside. She needed clarity more than catharsis. Her tablet chimed, ethics alert level raised. 3. Media triggered, external monitoring confirmed. She looked up. Brian Cole was standing again near the galley, whispering into the comm. His back was turned, but the slope of his shoulders said enough. He knew something had shifted. He didn't know how much. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to exist, uninterrupted. When she opened them, she found Elena standing there again, only this time she didn't ask for anything. She simply looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry." It was quiet, not performative, not polished, just real. Amara nodded once. Apology didn't erase behavior, but acknowledgement was a beginning. "I know you didn't tear the pass," Amara said, voice low, but silenced tears, too, just slower. Elena's face fell slightly. "I'll speak to the crew," she said. "No need," Amara replied, turning back to her screen. "The system already is." Elena looked at the tablet again, saw the live data feed, the line-by-line log of every choice made, every tone recorded, every word that would echo long after the wheels left the runway. She stepped back, gently, Amara began to type again, but this time her fingers didn't tremble. They moved with purpose, because she wasn't here to cause disruption. She was here to record it, and to make sure the skies never forgot. It wasn't just this plane anymore. At precisely 2:51 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a quiet flag inside GridTone's national network rippled across 17 nodes simultaneously. The system didn't flash red. It didn't ring alarms. That wasn't how it worked. GridTone operated like conscience, soft, constant, impossible to ignore once heard. In Arlington, Virginia. Rhea Desai watched the live dashboard shift. One small entry on AV316 had multiplied across the system like water seeping through unseen cracks. She leaned forward in her chair, eyes wide. She clicked through the source authorization again. AMX1 override. Clearance Ellison. That name. She remembered the lectures in grad school, the ethics case studies, the panel discussion where Amara Ellison's face lit up the projector. Now, that same woman had triggered the very system she'd built mid-flight, from a seat her crew had tried to erase her from. Ra stood up, her pulse racing. She crossed the open floor of the Ethics Response Center, waving down her supervisor. "Sir, we have a Class 1 ethics escalation in progress. Flight AV316 Denver to Boston." The man, older, skeptical, raised an eyebrow. "Mechanical security." Rhea shook her head. "Behavioral, passenger profiling, architect-level override from the plane. It's Dr. Ellison." He stopped, dead in his tracks. "Are you sure she tapped the grid herself? Tiered escalation, media impact already brewing." He turned to his console and pulled up the live feed. "Get me the FAA, back on the aircraft." Amara sat still in 2A, untouched by the growing chaos she had quietly set in motion. She wasn't trying to bring the plane down. She was trying to bring the truth up. Her screen pulsed once more. 17 concurrent alerts triggered, GridTone sensors engaged, flight control review initiated. She could feel the change in the air. Passengers still didn't know exactly what was happening, but they sensed the stall wasn't routine. Conversations had shifted from annoyance to speculation. A woman in row 5 muttered, "It's probably some VIP holding us up." A man in 6C replied, "Then why are so many other flights delayed now, too?" From behind her, Isaac Lynn glanced down at his phone. Notifications were pouring in. The tweet he'd sent minutes ago was now exploding. Someone had tagged him with a photo, a blurry side profile of Amara. The caption read, "She tapped something." Then all the gates locked up. Who is she? He didn't repost it. He respected boundaries, but he also knew what was coming. Public interest would move fast, and the truth, if not guided, would fracture into assumptions. So he began to write. Not a blog post, not a think piece, a record. Flight AV316 Live Ethics, lockdown triggered, Dr. Amara Ellison on board, background developer of GridTone, whistleblower on aviation compliance delays. What's unfolding isn't malfunction. It's a system doing what it was designed to do. Quiet accountability. He hit send. 20,000 people saw it in under 3 minutes. Across the aisle. Elena Ruiz leaned against the galley partition, watching the cockpit door, biting her lip. She was a pilot. She was also a woman of color. She had grown up in a family that told her to speak clearly, smile gently, and avoid being seen as difficult. And now, she stood watching an entire crew fail to see the very thing she saw clearly. A woman who had built the operating conscience they all worked under. A voice came over the comm from the cockpit. Ruiz, we've just been instructed to hold at gate. FAA wants a full procedural review before pushback. Something about Tier 3 ethics lock. She frowned. Tier 3 was supposed to be theoretical, reserved for systemic failures, not individual interactions. She walked back to 2A. Amara looked up before she even spoke. They're holding us, Amara asked. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, good. Amara replied, that means it's working. Elena lowered her voice. I've seen what they're saying about you online. You could destroy this airline in a sentence. Amara didn't respond for a moment. Then she said, I'm not trying to destroy anything. Elena waited. I'm trying to see who chooses to rebuild. Amara turned back to her tablet. Her finger hovered over one more setting. Escalation memo recommend system-wide behavioral cross-check. Include review of on-ground staff interactions and in-air protocol deviations. Attach anonymized audio flags. Discretion advised. She pressed send. Miles away, in a tall building overlooking the river in Boston, an airline boardroom grew tense. Executives had received the GridTone alert just minutes prior. They stared at the data feed in disbelief. You mean to tell me, one of them growled, that this delay wasn't technical but intentional? Another, younger, replied hesitantly, not intentional. It's automatic. Ethics protocols are coded to respond to escalations, especially from a passenger with her credentials. The CEO leaned forward. Credentials. She architected GridTone. Silence. Someone finally whispered. We tore the boarding pass of the woman who wrote the system that scores our compliance. Outside the plane, on the tarmac, a ground technician tried to initiate pushback clearance. Access denied. He stared at the tablet. Tried again. Access denied. Inside. Amara logged her final note for the hour. No apology yet. No acknowledgement from senior crew. Response escalating, not de-escalating. Public awareness rising. GridTone functioning as intended. She leaned back against the seat. The leather was soft. She closed her eyes. The hum of the cabin was familiar. The smell of sealed air, coffee beginning to brew, passengers sighing. It was all the same, except this time the system was listening, not for noise, but for silence, and what silence reveals. Not just who we are, but who we choose to be. Amara didn't say much. She rarely did when it mattered most. The world expected noise from people like her anger, defensiveness, protest. But she had long since learned that silence, when chosen, could be sharper than speech. Not the silence of surrender, the silence of structure, of intention, the kind that watches before it names, that gathers, stores, waits. She scrolled slowly through the feed on her tablet, observing the external monitoring now mirrored from the GridTone servers. Screenshots were spreading across social media, not of her face, not clearly, but of her seat, the torn pass, the tension in the crew's posture, the way certain passengers had tilted their bodies away from her without realizing it. One photo showed the moment she extended her wrist to the ceiling camera, like a quiet act of resistance. Under it, someone had commented, she doesn't need to yell. She built the system that's already speaking. She read that twice. Then she closed the screen. From across the aisle, Isaac Lynn continued typing. His coverage was now the top trending thread on 2 major news platforms, but he wasn't celebrating. He kept glancing toward her, checking, not just on the story, but on the woman behind it. Amara didn't acknowledge him. She appreciated the quiet. Elena Ruiz returned again from the cockpit, her expression tighter. "We're being rerouted," she said quietly. Amara raised an eyebrow. "Rerouted. We haven't even pushed back." Elena hesitated. "We're being assigned a new flight crew." Now Amara turned her full attention. Elena continued. "The FAA wants a non-involved team to continue the flight to Boston. Command decision. That's not a reroute," Amara said calmly. "That's a reset." Elena's shoulders fell slightly. "They're trying to contain it." Of course they were. Containment. The first reflex of any institution faced with reflection it didn't request. "They think replacing faces solves the pattern," Amara murmured. Elena didn't reply. She looked sad. A new kind of silence grew between them. Not hostile, just aware. "I want to be clear," Amara said softly. "I'm not here to punish anyone." "I know," Elena replied. "But the system is," Amara added, "and it doesn't forget." She watched Elena absorb the words not just with her ears, but with her spine. Before she turned away, Amara added, "You can still be part of what comes next." That stopped Elena. "Not every choice has to be a correction," Amara said. "Some can be a contribution." Elena looked down. "I'll stay." Amara gave a faint nod. Then she returned to her interface. GridTone had now begun compiling a heat map of similar infractions reported across domestic flights in the last 48 hours. The patterns were unsettling. Most profiling flags weren't the result of violent acts or security risks. They were the result of comfort assumptions. Phrases like, "I didn't feel safe sitting next to." She looked out of place. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Bias cloaked in politeness. Control disguised as caution. Amara tapped one category: gate-based profile errors. 86% occurred during boarding, not in flight. Top justification misalignment between perceived appearance and class of travel. She felt the old tension build in her chest. The same one from boardrooms, from interviews, from panel stages where the introductions would always begin with, "You don't look like the kind of person who'd lead a system like GridTone." She never corrected them. She just let the system do the answering. Captain Haynes hadn't come out again. He was waiting for resolution that kept his hands clean. The man had authority, but no leadership, and in this moment, those two were no longer the same. From the seat behind her, someone finally broke the uneasy quiet. A man's voice, measured, careful. "Dr. Ellison." She turned. He looked older, academic, a little stunned. "I'm sorry," he said. "I knew who you were 15 minutes ago. I just didn't say anything." She studied him, not coldly, not even critically, just with the full weight of truth. "It would have mattered more then," she said. He nodded. "I know." Silence again, this time, uncomfortable but honest. She let it sit, then she asked, "Why didn't you?" He hesitated. "I didn't want to be wrong. That I was who I said I was, no." He replied, "That I wasn't the kind of person who would stay quiet when it happened." She blinked. That was new. Truthful cowardice. She could work with that. A notification blinked on her tablet. FAA board requested debrief, post-landing, media inquiries, escalating, passenger identification confirmed publicly. She took a slow breath. Then she tapped a private setting. Message, Isaac Lynn. She typed just 2 sentences. "Keep recording, but tell the story slowly." He looked down at his phone as it vibrated. He didn't reply. He simply turned off his camera and opened a blank page. He began to write. Not for clicks, not for virality, but for memory. Back in Arlington, Ria Desai watched the live ethics console shift again. She could see the story unfolding, from her desk, from her screen, from the weight on her chest that wouldn't go away. She turned to her supervisor. "I think she's not just reporting," she said quietly. "I think she's building precedent." Her supervisor frowned. For what, Ria didn't answer right away. Then she said, "For the kind of future where flight doesn't require permission to belong, no one tells you how much it will cost to be right. Not just correct in the factual sense, but right in the moral one." Amara stared out the window, though there wasn't much to see. The tarmac stretched in muted gray, reflecting sunlight in hazy streaks. The plane hadn't moved, but the silence inside the cabin had shifted. Not frozen, not angry, just unsure. There's a sound people make when they realize they're in the presence of something larger than inconvenience. That subtle hush, that clearing of throats, the long pauses before they ask for anything. She heard it now. Brian, the flight attendant who had torn her pass, hadn't come down the aisle again, not once. He remained tucked behind the galley, speaking in hushed tones with another staff member now assigned to monitor the front rows. His voice was no longer sharp. It had become measured, cautious. He was no longer the one deciding the mood. Elena Ruiz had stayed nearby. Amara noticed that. The quiet kind of solidarity that didn't need permission, just presence. Elena didn't speak unless necessary, but her gaze often drifted toward Amara's row, not out of fear or performance, just to acknowledge. Amara returned her eyes to the front. The cockpit door remained closed. She wondered, briefly, if Captain Haynes was drafting a report, or hiding. Her tablet pinged again. GridTone Ethics Review Expansion Pattern Recognition identified 43 correlated flight entries with profile-based flagging, region domestic, time frame 48 hours. She tapped open the heat map. It wasn't just her. She knew that, of course, but seeing it plotted in clusters red dots over airports in Dallas, Atlanta, Phoenix, San Francisco, it felt heavier, like holding a truth that kept growing too large for silence. Each dot was a moment, a person, a decision made under the illusion of authority, and each one had triggered GridTone to listen harder. But the system could only do so much. It could log, it could reflect, it could alert, but change still required people. And that, Amara thought, was the most exhausting part. Because even now, even here, as data surged in and public eyes turned toward this tiny aircraft still idle at the gate, the hardest thing wasn't the system. It was convincing people that bias wasn't a glitch. It was the default setting. She looked to her left. The man in 2B had said nothing this whole time. He wore a navy blazer and glasses that looked expensive. His demeanor was one of polite distance, the kind of traveler who didn't want to get involved but hated being delayed. He finally spoke. "May I ask a question?" he said softly. Amara looked at him. He didn't flinch under her gaze. She gave him a nod. He leaned slightly closer, still respecting the space between them. "Why didn't you escalate earlier? You had the clearance. You could have had them replaced. Fired, publicly embarrassed." His voice wasn't accusatory, just puzzled. Amara held his eyes for a moment before replying, "Because correction isn't the same as growth." He didn't speak. She continued, "If you punish someone before they understand what they did, you teach them nothing but fear. But if they have to sit with the discomfort, If they have to feel the weight of being watched by the very system they ignored, then, maybe next time, they'll think. He sat back in silence. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was explaining herself for the record, because even justice had to explain itself when it came from a black woman in seat 2A. Her tablet buzzed again. This time, it wasn't GridTone. It was a message from someone in her inner network, a private channel, marked Senior Ethics Council, private. The message was short. We're ready to initiate the review if you want to submit your side. But we also understand if you're tired. She stared at that line for a while. We also understand if you're tired. As if being tired was an acceptable reason to let the machine keep running as it had. But in that moment, something softened in her. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right. She was tired. Tired of systems that learned her name only after they harmed her. Tired of being the exception that proved a broken rule. She thought back to a story her mother used to tell about a teacher who'd told 8-year-old Amara that her reading level must be a mistake. The next week, her mother had walked into the school with a stack of books Amara had already finished and read one aloud to the entire class. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard, her mother had whispered in her ear afterward. Just your truth. Amara began to type. Incident report. Dr. Amara Ellison Flight AV316. Date today. Summary, systemic profiling at point of entry, crew response, partial correction, no acknowledgement, passenger response, passive observation, emergent awareness. Personal note, I do not wish for retribution. I wish for revision. She paused. Then she typed one final line, and I wish for memory, because what we remember shapes what we do, and what we do determines what we become. She hit send. It would go into the archive, not the public one, not yet, but the one that tracked not just outcomes, but intent. She closed the tablet gently. Outside, the ground crew had begun moving again, a different set of staff, new pilot team approaching. She could see them from the window, 2 fresh uniforms, clipboard in hand, checking the aircraft tag. Isaac Lynn noticed, too. He whispered something into his recorder. They're swapping out everyone but her. In his voice, there was no mockery, only awe. Elena stepped beside Amara again. They're clearing you to take off within the hour. New captain, new clearance. They're asking if you need anything. Amara looked at her calmly. Just a seat. Elena nodded, then said, and if they don't give you that, Amara smiled barely, I don't need it given. She turned to face the front of the cabin. I already took it. The plane hadn't taken off, but something in Amara had. She felt it in her bones, not a surge of adrenaline, but a kind of slow, certain fire. It burned quietly beneath her calm exterior, stoked by the knowledge that this moment would outlive itself, that the data she had gathered, the stillness she had chosen, the weight she had carried, would not vanish with the closing of a cabin door. Across the aisle, Isaac Lynn was still watching. He wasn't recording anymore. His phone lay flat in his lap, but his eyes remained focused, not on the tablet, not on the crew, on her. Amara knew that gaze. She'd seen it before. It wasn't curiosity. It was the beginning of belief. People like Isaac had read about women like her once who didn't raise their voice but still shifted a room. But rarely did they see it unfold in real time, in the in-between moments, in the breath between an insult and an escalation, in the silence between an assumption and an accountability report. The cabin lights flickered again, softer now. A reset. New voices came over the comm, professional, calm. The new flight crew had officially taken over. Captain Morgan Delgado, First Officer Shanice Doyle. Names Amara didn't recognize, and that was the point. They hadn't been part of what happened, but they'd been asked to carry what came next. The sound of heels clicked down the aisle. Shanice, tall, composed, paused at 2A. Dr. Ellison, she said, not uncertainly, but with quiet deference. Yes, we've been fully briefed. There's no need for anything further unless you request it. Amara studied her. Young, black, a pilot. That mattered. Not because identity alone resolved anything, but because recognition often precedes responsibility. "Thank you," Amara said. Shanice nodded once, then moved on. From the row behind, someone whispered under their breath, "Is she the reason we're still on the ground?" Amara heard it. She didn't turn, but GridTone did. Her tablet buzzed lightly. It had flagged the comment as tone-coded bias, impatience framed as blame. It logged the timestamp, the seat number, the tone frequency. No names were made public, no punishment was triggered, just memory. The system had heard it. It would not forget. That was the beauty of GridTone, not vengeance, but witness. And sometimes, to be witnessed was to finally be free of pretending. Amara sat back in her seat, resting her hands quietly on her lap. She had made no demands, filed no threats. All she'd done was activate what already existed. But she knew what people would say, that she made things harder for the crew, that she turned a small moment into a statement, that she was playing a card. They always called it a card, never a context, as if survival strategies were games, as if history was optional, as if the system wasn't already playing against her long before she entered the jetway. She'd heard it all before, and still, she chose clarity over comfort. Across the country, in an office high above downtown Chicago, a law clerk named Danielle Reynolds read the circulating GridTone alert summary. She paused, then opened a bookmarked folder on her desktop. It was labeled Civil Action, Airline Bias 2021-2025, unresolved. She typed a note to her supervisor. Subject AV316, System Precedent, Match. We may finally have a test case, live data, plus ethics, override, plus public interest, plus qualified complainant. Recommend we monitor post-landing debrief. She clicked send. The email traveled, and another domino tilted. Back in 2A. Amara received a private ping on her device. Your incident data packet has now been mirrored to protected cloud storage. You have the option to anonymize or release. Would you like to submit to public review archive? She stared at it. That was a choice. To make the memory permanent, or to let the incident live only within the closed circle of compliance. She hesitated, because with permanence came weight, and weight had a cost. She tapped the screen. Submit anonymously. Let the data speak before the headline does. The system confirmed the entry. Somewhere, a statistic shifted, a pattern deepened, a new line of precedent prepared to be cited by someone in a hearing 2 years from now. Not with her name, but with her truth. That, to her, was enough. Elena Ruiz stepped close again, kneeling slightly to eye level. "They'll be closing the doors soon," she said gently. Amara nodded. "Do you feel safe to proceed?" It was a strange question, but the right one. Amara tilted her head. Safety isn't just about threats. Sometimes it's about whether the space around you can hold your truth without shrinking from it. Elena didn't look away. "I'll make sure it can." The moment held. Then Amara said, "Then yes, I feel safe enough." Elena stood, and for the first time since the delay began, she exhaled fully. She turned to return to her post, but paused, then asked one final thing. "Was there ever a moment," she said, "where you thought about walking away from the whole flight?" Amara thought for a long beat, then replied, "Yes." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Sometimes the truth is strongest when it's unadorned. And yet, here she was, still in the seat, still calm, still watching, still naming, because walking away might have protected her peace, but staying might protect someone else's tomorrow. So she stayed, not to make a point, but to hold one, with her presence, with her breath, with a system that now remembered exactly what it was built for. The cabin doors closed with a gentle hiss. To most passengers, it was just the familiar seal of departure, a signal that whatever tension had held them in limbo was finally mercifully breaking. But to Amara, the sound meant something else. It was a threshold, not just of altitude, but of consequence. She glanced down at the buckle across her lap, fingers resting on it for a breath longer than usual. She hadn't moved since the first crew left, not out of stubbornness, out of principle. She hadn't changed seats, hadn't stood, hadn't paced, because there was power in occupying space fully, without apology. The plane began to push back slowly from the gate. New captain, new voice, new tempo. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Delgado speaking. Thank you for your patience. We're scheduled for a smooth flight into Boston this afternoon. Estimated arrival is just over 3 hours. Please sit back, relax, and let us take care of you." The voice was warm, neutral, professional, but Amara heard the subtle inflection, the quiet effort to sound steady when the truth was everyone on this flight now knew it wasn't a normal afternoon. From behind her, she heard a child whisper to their parent, "Is that the lady from the story?" The parent shushed them. Too late. Amara didn't turn around. She wasn't interested in spectacle. She was interested in the long game, visibility without vulnerability. The flight began taxiing. For the first time in what felt like years, though it had only been 83 minutes, Amara allowed herself to lean back. Not to relax, but to reset. The world would read about what happened. Analysts would debate it. Comment sections would weaponize it. There would be those who turned it into an agenda. Others who denied it happened at all. But none of them were on this flight. They hadn't watched a torn boarding pass flutter to the floor. They hadn't felt the chill that moved through the cabin when silence spoke louder than policy. They hadn't seen the look in Elena's eyes, the one that changed from uncertainty to conviction. They hadn't watched Isaac lower his phone, not to record, but to listen. They would never know what it was like to be in the sky with the system learning to feel. And they wouldn't know what it meant for a woman like her to stay seated, when every instinct told her to walk away. The aircraft lifted off, smooth, confident, silent. Clouds blurred past the windows like distant memories. Altitude 4,000 feet, 9,000, 15,000. Beside her, the man in 2B cleared his throat gently. He didn't speak right away. Then, finally, he said, "I work in public sector tech." Amara turned slightly, surprised not by his profession, but by his willingness to bridge the silence. "I've watched your presentations," he continued, "on adaptive systems, bias latency, feedback loops." Amara nodded faintly, and she asked. He looked away for a moment, then back. "I thought I understood the theory." He said, "But I didn't understand the cost." Amara didn't respond. He continued, "Until today, I didn't realize how much of the system's failure comes not from code, but from comfort. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the part no one budgets for," she said softly. He chuckled, dry and honest. No one wants to pay for discomfort, not when denial's cheaper. Their conversation drifted into quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, one that made room. From row 6, Isaac Lynn opened his notebook again. Not his phone, a real notebook. He wrote the plane left the ground, but so did something else, a refusal to be minimized, a truth that doesn't need to be shouted to shift a system. He looked around. No one was raising their voice, no one was arguing, but every word that hadn't been said earlier, every assumption, every passive glance, every withheld acknowledgement was still circling in the pressurized air. Altitude preserved silence. But silence, here, wasn't permission. In the galley, Elena stood quietly, checking her crew's notes. Shanice approached. "They've stabilized," Shanice whispered, referring to the passengers. "No more complaints, no more whispers." Elena nodded. "That's the thing about tension," she said. "It doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just waits until it's named." Shanice glanced down the aisle. She named it. Elena didn't ask who she was. They both knew. Back at seat 2A, Amara adjusted her watch. It vibrated once, an alert from the ethics hub. Her report had triggered a review request in 2 more airlines' GridTone systems. Another chain reaction. Quiet, but deliberate. She exhaled, long and slow. This wasn't justice, not yet, but it was momentum. And sometimes that was enough. A few rows back, a college student with dyed blue hair and a sweatshirt reading Code Like a Girl whispered to her seatmate, "She's not even doing anything. She's just sitting there." The seatmate replied, "Exactly." The girl nodded slowly. "Power looks different than I thought." Overhead, the seatbelt sign dinged off. A flight attendant came by offering water, this one a different face. Fresh to the flight smiled gently at Amara, voice low, "Dr. Ellison, anything I can get you?" She shook her head. "I'm good, thank you." He moved on, and that was it. Not a performance, not a ceremony, just respect, earned not by demanding it, but by refusing to shrink. She looked out the window again. The clouds had thinned. Sunlight streamed in golden, diffuse, somewhere far below. People were watching news threads light up. Commentary was forming. Op-eds were being drafted. Systems were analyzing the ethical cascade in real time. But Amara was 32,000 feet in the air. No podium, no stage, no microphone, and yet the world was finally listening. The clouds began to thin, replaced by stretches of blue that felt almost too calm. It was the kind of sky that lied serene on the surface, but buzzing with turbulence beneath, somewhere over Pennsylvania. The flight reached cruising altitude. Cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. Passengers settled in. Conversations quiet. Eyes flicking between windows, phones, and each other. But beneath the normalcy, something had shifted. Not just in the air, but in the atmosphere between people. Every glance toward Amara was measured now not out of fear, but reverence. Like they weren't sure if they'd just watched a protest or a prophecy. Amara sat motionless, but her mind was a river, moving beneath the surface, unseen but powerful. She was used to this sensation, the paradox of being still while the world rearranged itself around her. From time to time, her hand brushed over her wrist. The sensor band there was subtle, woven into a silver bracelet that passed for jewelry but had function beyond fashion. It tracked more than heart rate. It registered stress responses, blood pressure patterns, even microtension in muscle groups. The data would feed into her private archive. Not to be sold, to be remembered. The quiet record of being watched, misunderstood, reevaluated, and finally respected all in under 2 hours. Elena passed by again. She didn't stop this time, just gave Amara a look, one of acknowledgement, one of alliance. Amara returned it. It was enough. Isaac Lynn hadn't said another word. He'd returned to his notebook, flipping pages, scribbling lines that were more poetry than journalism now. He was watching not just for quotes, but for clarity. What did this all mean, that a woman with quiet power had activated a system of silent accountability, that one moment of profiling had sent tremors through the airline's national grid, or that the plane was flying level again only because someone chose not to escalate when they could have? That part unsettled Isaac most. The restraint. Amara could have gone public. She could have posted the torn ticket, named names, called networks. She could have turned this into a live crisis. But she didn't. She let the system tell the story instead, and that Isaac realized was its own kind of revolution. A ping broke the quiet, not loud, just a vibration from the band on Amara's wrist. She checked the screen. External mention. Your name is trending on 3 major platforms. Top terms, GridTone, Seat 2A, Ethics Lockdown, Calm Rebellion. She exhaled. There it was, the part where the world started narrating you before you even spoke. She didn't open the posts. She didn't need to. Because whatever they were saying, whatever they thought this moment meant, it wasn't for them. Not really. It was for the girl whose boarding pass had been torn. For the boy 2 rows behind her who was now watching his mother watch Amara with something like pride in her eyes. For the college student in the sweatshirt who mouthed her name like it was a spell. And for every executive in every boardroom now pulling up her file, wondering how they ever forgot what it meant to build the system and still not be protected by it. That was the part no one warned her about. When you create something designed to keep people honest, you're never allowed to forget how dishonest they can be. The plane hit a small bump, just enough turbulence to remind everyone they were still in the sky. No screams, no panic, just tightened seatbelts and quiet recalibration. Amara didn't move, but her body did what it always did. It recorded. It noted the reflex. It mapped the tension. Even her stillness was a form of resistance. In the cockpit, Captain Delgado radioed for updated landing instructions. Boston Tower had added a special marker to their flight code VIP onboard handle with discretion. Delgado didn't ask who the VIP was. He didn't have to. The whispers among ground crew had already reached his headset. She's the one who triggered GridTone. Didn't she design the override feature? She shut down 3 hub delays without raising her voice. And beneath it all, a single sentence passed like folklore. She never asked to be treated differently. She just refused to be treated less. Delgado glanced back at the flight log, the crew swap, the ethics lock, the unusual number of FAA queries along their route. He hadn't said much since boarding, but his co-pilot, Shanice, noticed the way he held the controls tighter than usual. "You good?" she asked. "Quiet?" He nodded, then said, "I've flown thousands of hours, but this is the first time I feel like the air itself is listening." Shanice smiled softly. Maybe it always was. We just never knew how loud silence could be. In 2A. Amara's eyes flicked once more to the notification screen. Incoming message. Do you wish to record a personal statement before landing? Secure channel available, public or private option. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she tapped private. The screen went black, then lit again, recording. She waited, then spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it filled the cabin in ways no one else could hear. If you're watching this, you already know what happened. You've seen the logs, the footage, the escalation protocols. You've probably read 12 different versions of who I am. Let me give you one that matters. I am someone who no longer asks permission to exist in spaces I helped build. I am someone who believes systems can evolve, but only if we challenge the moments they fail us. And I am someone who, when given the choice to walk away or sit still and be witnessed, chose the seat, not because it was first class, but because it was mine. She tapped stop, saved, encrypted, filed under a folder marked "Memory Isn't Optional." Outside the window, the first coastline of Massachusetts began to appear. Boston loomed on the horizon. The flight wasn't over, but the silence that carried it had done something rare. It had spoken, and the world had, finally, started listening. The seatbelt sign clicked on with a soft chime. They had begun their descent into Boston. Outside, the city glittered faintly through a haze of afternoon sun and high-altitude mist. The coastline cut the horizon like a quiet reminder boundaries meant nothing to clouds. Inside the cabin, passengers stirred, adjusting tray tables, finishing drinks, tucking headphones away. Life resumed in familiar gestures. But the air still carried something unspoken, the kind of stillness that followed recognition. In 2A, Amara glanced once more at her tablet. The home screen displayed a quiet dashboard of numbers and moving points, flights flagged, ethics scores updated, time-stamped audio markers logged from AV316. GridTone's final report wouldn't be public for 48 hours. But internally, the shift had already happened. A memo had gone out from NACA, formerly passive, rarely reactive, indicating that incident-based overrides initiated by GridTone without direct administrative request will no longer be considered optional for compliance. It was subtle, bureaucratic, almost invisible. But to someone like Amara, it was seismic. It meant that a system she'd helped design was now being forced to respond, not just observe. The age of silent data was ending. She could feel it. 10 minutes to landing, the captain announced over the intercom. "Crew, please prepare the cabin." Elena passed down the aisle for one final check. As she passed Amara's row, she paused not long, just a second longer than usual. No smile, just a quiet nod, almost reverent. Amara returned it. Their language was not verbal. It had never needed to be. In row 6, Isaac Lynn closed his notebook. He'd stopped writing 20 minutes ago, not because he was done, but because some things didn't belong in ink just yet. He'd captured enough, but what he felt that would take longer to translate. For now, he observed, the posture of Amara's spine, straight but not rigid, the way the man beside her no longer shifted awkwardly in his seat, the absence of whispers behind them. There was no applause, no outburst, just alignment. The descent grew sharper, the tilt familiar, and still. Amara said nothing, not out of exhaustion, not out of strategy, but because her work was never about the landing, it was always about what waited beyond it. Her mind wandered briefly, to a time when she first joined the committee to build GridTone. She'd been warned, softly but often, that systems didn't change just because you named their flaws, that people, especially powerful ones, would smile at innovation, then quietly dismantle it behind closed doors. You'll be applauded in tech conferences, one advisor told her, and ignored in policy meetings. And, for a while, that was true. GridTone's demos went viral. Its TED Talk segments were clipped and passed around like digital gospel, but real change that had been slower, stickier, buried in legal briefs and footnotes, until now. Until one torn boarding pass gave the algorithm context and gave the country something it couldn't filter away. Her silence, not defiance, not rage, just truth that didn't flinch. The landing gear dropped with a muted clunk. The plane was almost there. Cabin secure. Shanice Doyle said into the intercom. Captain Delgado nodded without turning his head. He hadn't said much since takeoff, but that wasn't out of fear. It was respect. Some things you don't narrate over a microphone. You just carry them quietly and let them change how you fly. In the back of the plane, a teenager refreshed his social feed. Posts under Chudavok's Seat 2A were trending now, but the image that had gone most viral, it wasn't Amara speaking. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a still frame from a video Isaac had uploaded quietly, anonymously. Amara, looking out the window, calm, alone, unbothered. The caption underneath read, "She didn't move," and still. The world did. The plane touched down with a low, rolling thud, wheels kissing tarmac, weight meeting earth again. Passengers clapped quietly, not in celebration, in release. The moment was landing, too. As they taxied to the gate, Amara didn't check her messages. She didn't scan for updates or headlines. She just looked straight ahead, eyes clear, shoulders relaxed, no armor required, because dignity, once reclaimed, didn't need defending. She waited as rows began to file out. Some passengers paused at her row not to gawk, but to acknowledge. A quiet thank you from someone in row 3. A nod from the college girl with the sweatshirt, now zipped up but still stained with respect. Even the older woman who had asked earlier. Why didn't she just switch seats past without meeting Amara's eyes, but slower, changed, if only slightly. Amara remained until almost everyone had left. Elena returned one last time, now off duty. "I could walk you to the terminal if you'd like," she offered. Amara smiled. "No need. I know my way." A pause. Then Elena said softly, "I won't forget this flight." Amara reached for her bag. "I hope you don't." She stepped into the aisle, stood tall. As she reached the exit, Captain Delgado stepped out from the cockpit, blocking no one but waiting. He extended a hand. Amara hesitated only for a second, then shook it. "No apology," he said. "Just acknowledgement." She met his eyes. "That's enough." And then she walked, out of the plane, into the terminal, through a crowd that had no idea they were watching history in heels and quiet breath. No security escort, no spotlight, just footsteps, measured, full, and rising. The terminal was humming. Like any major airport on a weekday afternoon, people moving. Voices layered over PA systems, rolling bags tracing invisible paths across polished floors. But Amara's pace was unhurried. She walked like she wasn't just moving through space, but through meaning. Like every step was a deliberate entry into a conversation that had already begun long before she arrived. Most people didn't notice her, not because she was invisible, but because power, when held properly, doesn't always demand to be seen. It radiates, It lingers. It rewires the room without rearranging the furniture. A man in a gray suit stood near the arrivals board, checking his phone. He looked up as Amara passed, then back down quickly. He recognized her, maybe from the trending tag, maybe from a board meeting 3 years ago where her proposal had been tabled and quietly forgotten. He didn't say anything, but his silence wasn't neutral. It was the silence of a man suddenly remembering what he'd dismissed. Amara continued walking. She wasn't headed for baggage claim. Her carry-on small, practical was all she needed. Everything else was digital, cloud-stored, encrypted, unmovable in the ways that mattered. What she carried now was presence, memory, and a traceable line of accountability no security checkpoint could erase. Her GridTone dashboard pinged softly. The system had detected 2 more airlines initiating ethics patch evaluations based on her incident's cascading report. Not regulation yet, but momentum. She walked past a row of digital ad panels cycling through airline loyalty promotions and credit card bonuses. One of them flickered for a moment, glitched, then stabilized. The ad had started auto-pulling trending search content into its layout. For half a second, the phrase, "Seat 2A," the system didn't break, it logged in, appeared beneath a silhouetted image of a woman looking out an airplane window. Amara blinked, then kept walking. She turned down a quieter concourse wing intentionally. Less foot traffic, fewer eyes, more clarity. She was meeting someone here, not press, not family. Someone who understood the architecture behind the narrative. Someone who knew that the public moment on Flight AV316 was only the tip of the algorithm. It was Ria Desai, lead analyst from NACA's Ethics Division, a quiet force in policy who rarely appeared in public, and even more rarely requested in-person briefings. But today, Ria had made the exception. Amara spotted her seated at a bench near a closed gate, typing rapidly on a tablet. She looked up as Amara approached. No handshake, just a nod of equals. "I saw the reports," Ria said. "We've never had real-time convergence like this." Amara sat beside her, not facing her directly. They both stared forward, like 2 travelers waiting for a flight that wouldn't come. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," Amara replied. "GridTone wasn't designed for spectacle." Raya gave a thin smile. "It wasn't spectacle. It was inevitability." Amara looked at her. Raya continued. "You built the framework assuming the system would wake up slowly, but bias isn't subtle, it's cumulative. And you created something that didn't just monitor, it remembered. People forget, but GridTone doesn't." Amara nodded slowly. "That's the part they fear most," she said. "That memory becomes structure." Ria tapped her screen. "The airline will want a public reconciliation, a gesture, maybe a statement. I won't give them one," Amara said, simply. Ria looked over, surprised but not shocked. Why not? Because apologies framed by PR teams aren't about repair, they're about containment. Ria studied her for a moment. "Then, what do you want?" Amara didn't answer right away. She thought of the boy who watched her in silence, the woman who wouldn't meet her eyes, the college student in the sweatshirt, the second crew who led with dignity instead of protocol. "I want structural integrity," she said at last. "Not surface gestures. I want the system to stop rewarding the illusion of order when it's built on discretionary dehumanization." Ria exhaled. "And how do we measure that?" Amara turned to her. "You don't measure it by compliance reports. You measure it by what the system remembers next time. by how fast the algorithm pivots from data to intervention, by whether the next black woman in seat 2A doesn't need to stay quiet for it to activate. Silence passed between them, not tension, agreement. They sat like that for a while, watching as a janitor pushed a cart past, unaware he was sweeping across a concourse that had, in its own quiet way, become history. Amara stood. "I have to go." Rhea stood with her, where Amara smiled faintly. Forward. Rhea offered her a small packet, a secure folder. "This contains the ethics trace record for AV316. Internal use only. Yours by design." Amara took it. And then, like everything else she carried, she tucked it into her bag without needing to open it. She already knew what it said, and more importantly, she knew what it meant. They parted with no goodbyes, because when two systems align, there's no need for punctuation, only motion. As Amara walked back toward the terminal's main exit, the air felt different, not lighter, more charged, like potential, like narrative rearranging itself. She reached the doors, automatic, glass, reflective. For a moment, she saw herself in the reflection, not triumphant, not broken, just whole, fully formed in a world that still wanted her fragmented. And, as the doors parted, she stepped forward, not into fame, not into fire, but into function. And the system, quietly, followed. The sun was beginning to lower in the Boston sky, casting long shadows across the pavement as Amara stepped outside the terminal. The wind caught the edge of her coat, but she didn't pull it tighter. She welcomed the chill. It reminded her that she was back on the ground and that gravity, though invisible, was always present, just like bias, just like memory. A black car pulled up, unmarked, private service, clean, quiet. The driver, a young woman with sharp eyes and soft voice, stepped out, opened the back door, no fanfare, no small talk. Amara slid into the back seat, placed her bag beside her, and let the door close with a firm, final click. As they pulled into traffic, she looked out at the city. Boston was old in the way few American cities were, its history buried beneath its sidewalks, layered in brick and mistake. She had studied here once, long ago. That's where she first started noticing the patterns. Not in textbooks, in faces, in who got to speak first in classrooms, in who professors called on by default, in the softness of tone reserved for some, the skepticism sharpened for others. She didn't have a name for it back then, but now she did. Latency, not in systems, in perception. The delay between seeing someone and truly recognizing them, that was the seed of GridTone, not outrage, just observation. The car stopped in front of a brick building tucked behind a quiet university corridor. A plaque read Sundale Ethics Lab, no cameras, no press. This was legacy work, not public relations. Amara stepped out, walked through the door without swiping anything. The system recognized her by gait, by retinal scan, by silence. Inside, it was calm, almost sacred in its quiet. Down the hallway, past two interns whispering over code. One looked up, startled to see her. As that the other nodded, eyes wide. Yeah, it's her. Amara didn't slow. She wasn't here to be admired. She was here to remember what even systems forgot. At the end of the corridor was a room labeled Echo. Inside were 7 chairs, a round table, and one wall filled entirely by a curved screen. No cameras, no recordings, just space to speak, to archive what wouldn't be said elsewhere. She sat, the lights adjusted. The room vibrated slightly as it recognized her presence. "Welcome, Dr. Ellison," a gentle voice said, neutral, genderless, designed to soothe. "Would you like to review your memory cue?" "Yes," she answered. The wall lit up with frames moments GridTone had flagged as ethically significant but unfiled. They weren't public. They weren't indexed. They were hers. Moments she had seen, documented, but not submitted. Because some stories weren't for the world. They were for continuity. She selected one. A video clip opened, 3 years ago. An airport lounge. A black woman being told, quietly but firmly, that her ID didn't look like her. Amara had intervened gently, not with confrontation, just by asking a single question to the agent. Is your system facial recognition enhanced or still legacy verification? The agent had blinked, stuttered, stepped back. The woman had passed through. GridTone logged it. It had never aired, but it was stored here, with dozens more. Another frame opened a hotel lobby, a conference name badge misprinted deliberately to shrink her credentials. Another frame, a boardroom, where a junior staffer repeated her idea as his own. Each time, she hadn't shouted. She'd adjusted the variables, and now they lived here, in echo, because the world liked to forget quiet injustice, but Amara had built a place where memory wasn't optional. She leaned forward. Add AV316 to echo. Full trace, full ethics stack, confirmed. The system replied. Echo now holds 84 flagged events. Amara stared at the number. It wasn't impressive. It was sobering. 84 times she had let the data record what her dignity didn't have time to defend. And still, she rose. Still, she walked through terminals without flinching. Still, she sat in seat 2A like it belonged to her, and it did. The door to the echo room opened softly. Ria Desai entered, unannounced but not unexpected. She sat across from Amara. "I thought you might come here," she said. Amara nodded. It's the only place that listens back. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ria said, "You know there will be calls tomorrow, from the airline, from press, from advocacy groups. Some want to celebrate you, some want to caution you. I know. And your answer." Amara exhaled. None of them saw what happened in silence. They only see what they can label. She tapped the screen. These files, they're not about fame. They're about pattern. I'm not the story. The system is. Ria looked at her deeply. "And are you okay?" It was a small question, but it landed hard. Amara's lips parted. Her breath caught. She hadn't been asked that today, not once. And for a moment, the room didn't feel like code and logic and protocol. It felt like witness. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I'm tired, but I'm not finished." Ria reached across the table, not to shake hands, just to rest her fingers lightly near Amara's, an offering, a reminder that even systems need care, that even strong women, designed to remember everything, sometimes needed to be seen outside their data. Amara stood, save session, no transcript, session saved. The voice replied, encrypted, archived, unshared. She turned to go. At the door, she paused, looked back at the wall of frames, then said quietly, "Let memory do what people won't," and walked into the fading light of the hallway. By the time Amara returned to her apartment, dusk had bled into the edges of the skyline, turning the city into silhouettes and golden reflections. She lived high up, not for the view, but for the quiet. The world looked less chaotic from this angle. Patterns were easier to see when you weren't tangled in them. She stepped inside. No lights turned on. The soft hues from the windows were enough for her to navigate the open space. Her apartment was minimal, but lived in. Books, stacked methodically by the window, a ceramic dish with loose change and one Metro card, a tea kettle, slightly stained from use. One photo framed, never moved. It was her and her mother, taken long before titles, systems, or ethics dashboards. Her mother's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not possessive, not posed, just there, support without performance. She made tea in silence. Jasmine, the same kind her mother used to brew every time Amara came home exhausted from school, worn not by the workload, but by the weariness of always having to prove what others were simply assumed to be. She sipped slowly, her body folding into the corner of the couch. The mug warmed her hands, but her mind remained cool alert in its stillness. She wasn't thinking of interviews, or policy briefings, or what tomorrow's headlines would attempt to reduce her story into. She was thinking about calibration. How long it took to recalibrate yourself after a moment like Flight AV316. Not because of what happened, but because of what it reminded you could always happen. Being stripped of status, of assumed belonging, even when you built the system that granted it, even when you trained the machine to recognize the fault lines. It could still be turned against you if someone insisted loudly enough that you didn't belong, because discrimination didn't need evidence, it only needed volume. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her assistant: tomorrow's meeting with the MIT Civics Lab is confirmed. They want you to speak on memory systems and silent protocol ethics. Should I prepare a deck? Amara typed slowly, no deck, just questions. Another message arrived, this time from Isaac Lynn. He hadn't spoken to her since the flight, though he had messaged once to thank her. Now, it was just a link, a piece he'd published. Title Flight 316 didn't need a hero. It needed a historian. She clicked. His words were sharp but quiet. There was no embellishment, no clickbait, only precision. He hadn't named her until the end. Instead, he wrote about systems that remember too little, people who demand too much, and what it means when someone chooses not to escalate but still activate something bigger than any confrontation. The final line. If dignity had a frequency, you could have felt it humming from seat 2A, not in defiance, but in design. She closed the article and sat still for several long moments. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. A siren moaned in the distance. Inside, she was remembering a conversation from 6 years ago. Back when GridTone was just theory, she'd been presenting to a panel of funders. One of them, a well-known venture figure, had asked bluntly, "Isn't this just affirmative action disguised as code?" She hadn't flinched then. She wouldn't flinch now. She'd simply replied, "No. It's not about advantage. It's about audit. You can't fix what you won't name." He hadn't funded the project, but she had built it anyway. Not with his money, but with her mother's lessons, her own observations, and the slow, quiet backing of people who believed that dignity didn't need to be dramatic to be real. Her tea had gone cold. She stood, poured it down the sink, and looked out the window one more time. The city below moved in currents, pedestrians crossing streets, headlights blurring into motion. People who would never know what had been prevented midair because one woman refused to be erased by protocol. Tomorrow, the inbox would fill. There would be invitations, critics, defenders, historians, spin doctors, But none of them would understand that the power didn't begin in that cabin. It began years before, in meetings where she was the only black woman in the room, in software testing where the AI flagged her face as unknown because the data set had been trained on everything but her reflection, in classrooms where her tone was described as too precise and her silence misread as submission. She had been building toward Flight AV316 her entire life, and when it came, when the moment finally asked, not whether she was angry, but whether she would allow herself to be reduced, she chose differently. She chose to let the system speak, and that changed everything. She turned from the window, closed the blinds, not to shut out the world, but to gather herself again. The real labor of people like her wasn't the moment of protest. It was the aftermath, living without bitterness, persisting without apology, designing systems that outlasted individual cruelty. Her reflection lingered faintly in the dark glass. Still, present, enough. The building hadn't changed, same glass facade, same sterile lobby, same security desk with the same practiced smile. But Amara had, and that was enough. She stepped through the revolving door of the Northwell Institute for Systems Design, where 6 years ago she had first pitched GridTone not as a product, but as a principle. They hadn't understood her then. Worse, they hadn't wanted to. She remembered the words clearly. Too ambitious, too sensitive, not commercially viable, no real threat to optimize against, and behind every line a polite way of saying, "You're not who we expected to bring this forward," but now they had called her, requested her presence, invited her to return to the room that once closed its doors on her data and her dignity. She wore no badge. The receptionist recognized her face before she spoke. "This way, Dr. Ellison. The board is waiting." She followed in silence. Hallways sterile with achievement photos of conferences, glass plaques etched with buzzwords efficiency, intelligence, ethics. She paused briefly at one. The quote on it read, "Systems must serve everyone, or they serve no one." Unattributed, he had said that 3 years ago in a blog post, uncredited, now immortalized on a wall of innovation that once erased her. She smiled not in anger, but in clarity. This was what systems did. They harvested truth without always remembering its origin. She stepped into the boardroom. 7 people, all in suits, a few familiar faces, a few new ones. The chair, a woman named Lila Sorensen, stood Dr. Ellison. "Thank you for making time for us." Amara nodded. She didn't sit yet. "Before we begin," Lila said, "I want to acknowledge that what happened aboard Flight AV316 was unacceptable. You have our full support." Amara tilted her head. "Support isn't the same as memory." She replied, "Do you recall what you told me in this room when I proposed a bias auditing protocol?" Lila hesitated. "I don't have that transcript in front of me." "I do," Amara said, and calmly placed a thin folder on the table. "No dramatics, just records. You said, 'Bias is a human issue, not a system flaw. We don't need to monitor human instincts, only machine performance.'" Silence. Then Amara continued. "Flight AV316 didn't malfunction. It performed exactly as trained, which means the issue was never machine error. It was institutional design." She sat now, not in submission, in presence. Another board member, Daniel N., leaned forward. "We'd like to consult with you, maybe even reintegrate GridTone under joint development." Amara looked at him. I didn't come here to sell you something. But the system's ethical pivot post AV316 was not a pivot. She interrupted. It was a memory activation. One your board once labeled excessive friction against consumer flow. The room shifted. It wasn't hostile, but it was no longer comfortable. Lila tried again. We recognized the error in our previous evaluation, and with public momentum. This isn't about momentum, Amara said. It's about capacity. Whether your systems are even capable of holding memory longer than a headline. She stood again, walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, drew 3 circles, one inside the other. This, she said, pointing to the center, is individual experience, what you call customer satisfaction. She tapped the middle circle. This is systemic reaction policies, apologies, training. Then she touched the outermost circle. And this is design, the layer that never gets touched because it's embedded in silence. She turned to face them. Your institute exists between circle 2 and 3, but your impact ends at 1. Nobody spoke. GridTone wasn't created to soothe backlash, she said. It was designed to give the system recall, not for media optics. But so that next time someone is erased quietly, the system speaks before the victim has to. She capped the marker, placed it down. You didn't believe me then. I don't need you to believe me now. But you do need to decide if your future product roadmap includes moral recall or just reactive PR. Daniel spoke again. Then, what do you propose? Amara folded her hands calmly. You don't get to onboard GridTone, but you will receive its compliance triggers. You will be audited through third-party ethics trace nodes, and if any line of data indicates structural regression, your system flagging will go public through transparency APIs. Lila stiffened. That's not standard protocol. Amara nodded. Because protocol is what protected you before. I'm not asking for trust. I'm building in consequence. There it was, the shift, from negotiation to architecture, from apology to recalibration. She picked up her folder. Thank you for your time. Daniel stood. Wait, won't you even consider our full ethics reintegration offer? Amara turned one last time. No. But why she paused, let the moment breathe. Because you only said yes when I was undeniable. And with that, she left, calm, unmoved, and more powerful than any headline could ever describe. The next morning arrived without announcement. No media storm outside her door, no bouquet of apologies, no calls from corporate spokespersons offering statements for mutual benefit. Amara preferred it that way, because real change didn't come draped in noise. It came through shifts in the unseen where code is written, where policies are reviewed in silence, where junior designers question a line of logic because of a woman they'd only seen once, walking through a terminal alone. She brewed jasmine tea again. The smell curled around the morning air like memory. Not nostalgia. Proof. Proof that the rituals we return to are often the ones that root us. She checked her email. Hundreds of messages. Some were press requests. Others were from university students asking if they could study GridTone for thesis work. A few were deeply personal strangers recounting small moments of being made to feel less than in airports, schools, courtrooms, and boardrooms. They didn't all mention race, but they didn't need to. The common thread wasn't identity. It was erasure. Tiny, sharpened moments where presence was questioned, where silence had been mistaken for submission, where comfort had been demanded at the cost of someone else's dignity. She replied to one message, then another, not with essays, just "I see you, stay grounded." Later that morning, she stood by the window, holding her cup. When her phone rang, unknown number, she answered, "This is Amara." The voice on the other end was low. "Careful. Hi. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. This is Elena from AV316. For a moment, Amara didn't speak. Then, "You don't need to explain." "I know," Elena said, "but I want to." Amara nodded, even though no one could see her. Elena continued. "I replayed that flight 100 times in my head. There were moments I should have done more. Sooner." "You did enough," Amara said softly. "You recalibrated the culture in the middle of a sealed cabin. That's not nothing." There was a pause. Then Elena said, "I didn't want to call to be forgiven. I wanted to say thank you for holding the line without making a scene." Amara smiled, faintly. "That's the part no one teaches you," she said. "That holding the line doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it just looks like staying seated." "I hope we fly together again," Elena said. Amara's voice was steady. "If we do, it'll be on a system that remembers." They ended the call, and Amara sat back down, not because she was tired, but because the moment called for stillness. Later that day, the MIT Civics Lab event went live on their streaming platform, a modest auditorium, no grand lights, no dramatic music, just a stage, a chair, and Amara. She didn't use slides, didn't recite her resume. She began with a question. What does it mean to be remembered by a system that was never designed to see you? The room went still. She didn't fill the silence. She let the weight of that question land. And then she spoke, not like a keynote, but like a woman sharing the anatomy of endurance. "I didn't set out to build a weapon. I set out to build a witness." She said, "GridTone is not a shield. It's a mirror. It doesn't prevent injustice. It refuses to forget it." She looked around the room. I was told, many times, to make it softer, less triggering, less assertive. The audience waited. "I didn't," she said, "because silence is already too familiar to people like me. The kind of silence where your credentials don't speak louder than your skin." A hand went up. A student, nervous, Dr. Ellison. "What would you tell someone who's just now realizing they've benefited from systems that erase others?" Amara considered. Then said, "Begin by asking yourself what you've forgotten and why." The student nodded, wrote that down. Later, another hand. "Do you believe GridTone will change the airline industry forever?" Amara smiled. "No system changes anything forever, but it changes what gets measured, and that changes how accountability feels. After the event." She stood alone for a moment near the edge of the stage. A technician packing cables nodded at her. "You made me call my mom," he said shyly. She tilted her head. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I remembered how many times she flew while black, alone, and never told me what that felt like." Amara didn't say anything, just met his eyes. He understood. Because dignity doesn't require dialogue, it just needs space to echo. That evening, she walked home, no car, no press, no security detail, just pavement and quiet air. As she reached her building, she noticed something taped to the door of the bakery next to her lobby. It was a printed-out article, Isaac's piece. The last line circled in blue pen, "If dignity had a frequency." You could have felt it humming from seat 2A. Below it, someone had written in neat cursive, "She didn't move, but we did." She touched the paper gently, then walked upstairs. Upstairs. She changed into comfortable clothes, turned off her phone, made one final cup of tea, and sat down this time, not as a systems architect, not as a witness, but as a woman who had once been told she was too quiet to make a difference, and who, by doing exactly that, had changed the sound of silence forever. 3 months passed. No viral interviews, no book deal announcements. Amara Ellison never once publicly recounted what happened on Flight AV316. She didn't have to, because systems, once triggered to remember, do not return to forgetting without consequence, and GridTone had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had remembered out loud. Across the country, airport systems quietly adjusted parameters. A flag labeled Soft Surveillance Bias Audit began popping up when boarding agents made discretionary overrides without documentation. It wasn't punitive. It was traceable. Some agents grumbled, others grew cautious, but a few, mostly young, mostly quiet, adapted, because they understood what Amara had always known: bias thrives in silence. But accountability blooms in design. Amara herself had returned to her work, not in hiding but in rhythm. The GridTone team had expanded, not in number, in clarity. Engineers now had access to a new branch of the code base Amara called Quiet Ethics, a sequence of reflective response layers that required no external prompt. Only system-recognized moments of potential erasure. Moments that would have once slipped by undetected, now caught, not punished, witnessed, a subtle recalibration of trust. One Thursday morning, as she sat by the window reviewing an updated ethics compliance trace, an alert pinged softly. GridTone had flagged a mid-air incident aboard a different airline. A flight attendant had requested a seat reassignment for a dark-skinned teenage girl traveling alone. No violation was logged, but GridTone's trace layer had asked a question. Does this reassignment follow the same threshold logic used for other passengers? The agent paused, reviewed the system flag, and rechecked the passenger manifest. She reversed the change. No one on the plane ever knew what almost happened, except GridTone. And now, Amara. She closed the file. She didn't smile. She breathed, because this was the work, not the spectacle. The subtle repair of dignity before it has to defend itself. Later that afternoon, she received a private message request on her internal inbox. It was from her former student Kieran, now heading a compliance project for a major airline consortium. The message read, Dr. Ellison, we're building a new accountability interface, not just for incidents, but for instinct. We want to license your Quiet Ethics module, not to brand it, just to integrate it. We'll credit it as you prefer, even if it's anonymous. She stared at the words for a long time, then typed back, credit it to the system, not to me, but it's your name that made them listen. Her reply was short. No, it's the silence that made them look. That weekend, she traveled again, not for a summit, not for testimony, just to visit her godson in Denver. A surprise? As she walked into the airport, there was nothing special, just people, luggage, movement. She passed the check-in counter, no tension, no pause. The agent smiled. Boarding pass Amara handed it over. The agent's eyes scanned her face, then the screen. Her expression changed but subtly. Recognition, respect. Maybe neither. Maybe just understanding. Thank you. Dr. Ellison, she said. You're in 2A. Amara nodded, not surprised, Not flattered, just present. She moved through security, sat in the gate area. Her phone buzzed again, an anonymous notification from GridTone's passive sentiment sensor. Public system sentiment for her name was now classified as resonant awareness. It meant people didn't just know who she was, they remembered why she mattered. But that wasn't the point. As the flight boarded, she took her seat, 2A, window, same quiet hum, same sequence of clicks and beeps. The crew was calm, professional, attentive, but not performative. There was a man across the aisle, white, middle-aged, looked up once, met her eyes, then smiled. A real smile, not one seeking reassurance, just acknowledgement. The plane took off. Clouds rose, altitude climbed, and Amara, for the first time in months, allowed herself to rest not with vigilance, but with trust. The flight was uneventful. No headlines, no delays, no reassignments. When the crew came down the aisle with beverages, the attendant leaned in. "I read about you." "Quietly," she said. "Just wanted you to know, we changed one of our policy scripts last week, because of you." Amara looked at her, not surprised, not inflated, just grounded. "Then that's enough," she said. When the plane landed, no cameras waited, no applause, no whispers, only the sound of wheels rolling, people standing, bags being claimed. But something had changed, not in the noise, in the baseline, in the unspoken structure, in the system itself. As she exited the gate, she saw a young girl standing beside her father. The girl had curly hair, a backpack, a sketchbook. She looked up at Amara. No fear, just wonder. And Amara paused. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi. Are you the lady who made the plane smarter?" Amara knelt gently. "No. Sweet one. The planes always knew how to fly. I just helped them remember how to see." The girl grinned. "Thank you." And that was it. No drama, just truth. As Amara walked out into the world, the doors slid open without resistance. Her name wasn't on the side of the aircraft, but the system knew her now. And, more importantly, it remembered. She never raised her voice. She never screamed for cameras. She didn't demand headlines. Instead, Dr. Amara Ellison sat in her assigned seat, let the system forget her, and then reminded it how to remember. And, because of that, everything changed. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but in code, in culture, in the quiet protocols that now blink red when erasure tries to happen again. No, her name isn't written on the side of the plane. But now, the system knows her. And, more importantly, it knows what silence costs. This is more than a story of racial bias. It's a story of what happens when dignity doesn't ask for permission. A story of one woman who refused to be reduced, who turned her exclusion into architecture, her erasure into ethics, and her presence into policy. And through that, thousands who looked like her will no longer have to prove they belong at 30,000 feet. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of your mother, your daughter, yourself, then share it. Let it ripple. Let it remind the world that discrimination doesn't always shout sometimes. It whispers, but now, systems are finally listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that reveal quiet power, hard truths, and the kind of justice that doesn't need applause to last. Because what flies higher than a plane is a voice that refused to be grounded.